Okay. Um, I wanted to share this I'll try to make it brief because I know we're a little bit over time. But last night, I was laying in bed with Max. It was, bedtime. We still had the lights on, I think. And he, lately, he's been asking us, when is he going to die? Right. And he's asking us and he wants us to tell him at what age he's going to die. And we explained to him that we don't know. Like, I don't know when I'm going to die. I don't know when he's going to die. It's not and it's interesting because last night he was asking me again, and I was explaining to him that I don't know. And it's not something that we can know. And he was like, well, why can't we just look it up? Right. So I'm having to explain to him why you can't do that, why it's not something that we can know. And he's been asking us that for like the past week or so, maybe a little bit more. Just every once in a while, he'll ask us that. Right. And it kind of is the evolution of, it's like, for example, whenever we would catch a frog, right, or a bug or something, and we would say, now be careful with it, don't squeeze it too hard, he would ask why. And as you all know, we always have this principle of always explaining everything as much as possible within the context of what he can understand, and then building his context and vocabulary when it's beyond what he can understand. So we would explain to him, well, if you squeeze the frog too hard, it can die. It can be injured or it can die. And then he would ask, well, what does it mean to die? What does that mean? We would explain, like, your body doesn't work anymore. You're not here anymore. And he would say, well, what happens when you die? And we would explain to him, you don't exist anymore. You're not here. And so what do most people tell their kids? Like, I don't know. But some of you all are parents, right? You probably know other parents. What are most people telling their kids?
That they go to heaven.
Yeah, with certainty, apparently, that you
right?
go
Like,
to this
they tell them all
place.
kinds of stuff, right? And last night when I was laying in bed with Max, and he was asking me again. He was like, when am I going to die? At what age? What age am I going to die? And I was like, I really don't know. And he was like, well, can I live? Can I be with 3,000? And I said, I don't think so, Max. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know for a fact you can't live a very long time, longer than anyone's lived before, or what most people live now. I said, but at the same time, I can tell you based on the way things are at the moment and what I know, it's probably not going to happen. It's not likely, right? But I'm also not going to tell you for sure it's not possible, because I don't know that either, right? And it's interesting because when we talk about, for example, things like Santa Claus, we explain to them what people are saying, but then what the reality of it is. And we have a book called One Morning in Maine, where this little girl makes a wish on her tooth that she loses. And I explained to him, like, wishing itself doesn't do anything. It's not a real thing. And it's funny because when we talk about it, he understands. Like, he'll explain it to you. If you ask him, like, if you wish for something, does that make it happen? And he says no. And then you can ask him, like, what's the best way to make it, to get the thing you're looking for? He's like, to go make it, or to go get it, or to ask somebody, right? Because the book also emphasizes that your wish should be a secret. And I'm like, does that make sense? And he's like, no. So even though we read these things, we can give context to it, because he's going to hear things like that, right? So he's developing an ability to distinguish between, like, what's imaginary and what's not real, and so forth. And I talked the other day, I think at one of our other meetings on, like, self-leaders or something, about walking him through the point of what was it? The fear of the dark. We were working with that the other day. Anyway, so last night we were talking about this point, and he brought it up again, and he was telling me, like, I want to know when we all will die, right? And I said, that's not something that we know, obviously, right? And because he kept asking me, I said, Max, are you concerned about dying? Or is it something that you're worried about, or you're concerned about, or why is it that you want to know? And I could see his, like, eyes starting to, like, tear up, right? And he was trying to kind of hold back his tears and so forth. And he was like, I don't want to die. I want to live. I want to be alive. And I said, okay. I said, I understand. I said, why? He said, I like being alive. I don't want to die. Right. And it was really interesting, because there was, like, this point within me that wanted to make him feel better about it, and just tell him something like, well, maybe you'll live for a really long time, probably you won't die for a long time, or it'll be fine when you die. And, maybe you won't have to die or something. Like, I wanted to make him feel better. But I also knew that if I did that, that's going to cause a problem for him later, because he's going to have to face the reality that he will die someday, and that I'm going to die someday, and that everybody's going to die at some point. That's something you have to face as a human being. And I explained to him, why death occurs from the perspective of the system that we live in, and how our bodies, the way our minds and everything, it creates imbalances. So even though from a practical physical perspective, a body could exist forever, it doesn't have to die. That's not the way it is at the moment, because the system we live in isn't best. And the way I'm explaining it right now is exactly how I explained it to him. And so then he was, starting to understand that point, but still kind of stuck on that point of like, but when am I going to die then? Like, I don't want to. And I could see him wanting to cry. And I said, look, Max, it's okay if you want to cry. And then he just started like crying for like probably an hour, like not like just straight crying for 1 hour, but like on and off, right? Just talking about it. And I was like bringing up points and asking him like, well, what do you think about this and everything? And it was interesting because I could see there wasn't like a fear of dying per se. It was more like but I want to be here kind of a thing, rather than I'm afraid of what's going to happen because I don't know, which is kind of how I experienced it when I was younger. But it was interesting too, because there was one point where he was crying, and like, I was looking at it for myself of like, I faced, like, I know what it was like to feel terrified about what's going to happen when I die, and not knowing the answer to it, and not being satisfied with any of the answers that I was told when I was a kid. And I told him that. I said, I know how you're feeling right now, Max. I really do understand. And I said, and it's okay for you to cry. Like, and so we let him cry for a little bit, and we talked back and forth, and he would be okay. And then, I was explaining to him, remember this frog that died that we buried in the backyard, right? He said, yeah. And I said, what happened to it? He's like, well, it went to the earth. And I said, and so where did it go though? He was like, in the earth. And I said, so, and now that frog's body becomes part of the dirt, and then it can become part of a tree. It's still here. It's just not the same way it was before. And I said, that's what happens to us. Our bodies die, and then we go back, and then we can be parts of other things. Right. And it was cool because I was not explaining it to him in a way where it's like, you'll get to be a tree. It was more like, this is just the natural process of what is physically occurring. Right. And it was a really interesting experience, because I could feel that part where it's like, I wanted to just make him feel better somehow about it. But then I also was like, but I'm not going to lie to him. I'm not going to lie to him, because then he's going to find out anyways, and he's going to have to face it. And then it's going to be even worse. And then also it's going to contribute to him not understanding how reality works. It's not going to serve him in any way. And what struck me afterwards, because eventually he fell asleep, and then actually I got on the phone call with Bruce. He had asked me to chat. So we chatted about his sale and everything. So, but in between that time where I called him, I had a little bit of time to reflect on it. And I was just thinking about, like, I had to face that point. I mean, I'm assuming all of you've had to face it, like, consider it and accept the reality of it. And I was like, because like there was a part of me that felt bad for him, if that makes sense. Like, I felt bad that he was having to feel like this way about it. And I was like, I had to face that too. That's a part of our reality that we have to come to terms with. They have to accept it. And I had told him also, I had said, Max, another thing and that the huge thing I forgot to mention is that we started doing self-forgiveness together. And I said to him, I said, look, why don't we do some self-forgiveness on this point? Okay. And he goes, it was so cool because he was like crying, and he stops and he goes, okay. He goes, tell me what to say. Right. And I was like, okay. And then I just, I started doing some self-forgiveness. I would pause and like let him repeat. And then, we would do that. And we did on a few points. And I told him, I said, even though we're doing the self-forgiveness, I said, you have to understand that at a certain point, what's going to cause you to keep feeling bad about it is just that you're continuing to think about it, and you're continuing to dwell on it, because that's generating an emotion within you. And I said, so you're going to have to take responsibility. You're going to, at a certain point, you're going to have to accept that this is reality. And then you're going to have to forgive yourself and then not participate in those thoughts anymore. And at the same time, I said also, and I said, I'll explain to you, Max, because I'm not saying you need to suppress your fear about it, or your concern, or your whatever the emotions are. I said, but here's how I've handled it within myself. Here's how I've directed it. I said, I'm not really concerned about it, because if we live in a way where we're doing everything we can to create a world that's best, because that would be the only way in which we could have a world where we don't have to die unnecessarily, would be if the world was best. And that's why we have death, because it's not. And I said, the only way, I said, so if we focus on living in a way where we're focused on what's best, then we don't need to worry about what happens when we die. It won't matter, because it'll be best, whatever the outcome is. Right. And I said, another thing too, is when you're, constantly focusing on what happens when I die and worrying about it, because once you come to terms with it, I said, if you're constantly focusing on it, you're not actually here living. You're just thinking about what happens when you die and worrying about that. And I said, so the purpose of being here is to enjoy being here, not to be thinking about what happens when you're not here. Right. And so I'm saying it to him in a way where it's like, I don't want to force him to stop thinking about it. I don't want him to not ask me. I don't want him to not ask and want to know. But at the same time, I'm not supporting within him this point of, yeah, just feel sad about it. Right. Because what's the purpose of that? Right. But then also trying to understand from his perspective, where is that feeling come from, and trying to relate to him and looking at within myself. So the reason I wanted to share all of that is because I was looking at the point and realizing, isn't that kind of amazing that he's facing this point at 3 years old? And I realize there may be some people who would think, oh, he's too young to be thinking about that kind of stuff, and that's whatever. But it's like, but he's going to have to think about it eventually. And the reason why he's able to confront it and start talking about it and we can have a conversation is because he has a high vocabulary. And I'm like, I actually would have liked for myself to have faced it as soon as possible. Yeah. And then come to terms with it. And then, okay, now let me live. Because I spent most of my life following the system until I was 22. And then at that point, that's when I started to question the system. And that's when I started facing my fear of death and really being terrified, and then getting depressed and all this other stuff and feeling lost. Mm-hmm. So he's getting to face all of that really early on. And I just wanted to share that with you guys, because, we don't always post the quote negative stuff on Facebook, because a lot of what we're posting is for the purpose of, it's kind of like branding or marketing in a way, right? It's for all of you to use, right? But that's why we posted things like with Seneca and the toad and all of that stuff. But obviously the story I'm sharing right now is a little bit more context required, to understand what I'm explaining here. So,
which is very helpful, right?
Plus people are going to have their ideas about what happens when you die. So they're going to disagree with that. That's why I'm kind of keeping this just for all of us. Right. So, but I wanted to share that because it's like, we have a world where it's like, I don't even yet have fully the vocabulary to really explain to Max the whole context, and I know eventually he has the tools, so he will be able to then go into all the destiny and everything and start and study it for himself as well, so he can see it for himself. But I want to create a world where children just can live and enjoy life and not have to worry about shit. You know what I mean? And when you look at everything going on right now in the world, I mean, there was just another police shooting in Wisconsin yesterday, and now they're burning down Wisconsin and looting the stores and attacking police and everything. So this is not going to just get better naturally. The system is collapsing. And, we'll probably talk about this further on another time, but when you look at what the agenda is from an elite perspective, they just want to control. They don't know how to build a new system because the starting point hasn't changed. So it's up to us to build that system, right? And part of that is educating the population, because if people are unwilling to face physical reality and learn how it actually works because they'd rather be in fantasy land and make themselves feel good, then we're never going to solve the problem, right? So what we're doing is extremely important, right? Because the more people that have technotutor, the more kids that can relate to Max and Seneca can relate to and have actual peers instead of just a bunch of dumbed down people who follow the system. Because you can see